Okay. All right, welcome everybody. I believe, are live on both Zoom and YouTube. So thank you to everyone in attendance. Thank you to our panelists. My name is... I'm sorry, I had our YouTube streaming up at the same time, so I could hear myself repeating myself. Let's start again. I'm Meryl. I'm the executive director here at Village at Ithaca, and this is our annual Ithaca City School District Board of Education Candidates Forum, our second held virtually. So we hope that we are old hat at this by now. I'm going to go over a couple of logistical things, and then I will turn it over to our moderator for the evening. This year's Board of Education election will be held on Tuesday, May 18th. Voting will be open at your polling place from 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. There is still time to request an absentee ballot in person at the district's clerk's office on Lake Street. Absentee ballots may be returned by 5 p.m. on May 18th. And you do qualify for an absentee ballot for COVID-related reasons, as well as the other traditional voting reasons. There are 4 candidates running for 3 open seats. All of those candidates are here with us this evening. They are Kelly Evans, Nicole Lefebvre, Moira Lang, and Ann Reichland. I would like to introduce and thank this evening's timekeeper, Carl Matteo. Carl is the current president of our board here at the Village and is reprising his role as timekeeper for the 2nd year. Thank you so much, Carl, for your willingness to do that. If you are having trouble in that the time or the welcome screen is too big, you can adjust your own Zoom settings by going to View in the corner and putting on Gallery View. You can also go under View Options and adapt to a 50% screen share. So that way, when the timer comes up, it's not taking up your entire screen. And now I will introduce our moderator, also reprising her role for the 2nd year. Thank you. This is Karen Yearwood. Karen has been a resident in Ithaca for 16 years with her husband and their 2 children. One is an ICSD graduate and one is currently at Ithaca High School. She has been actively involved in ICSD on PTA and is currently representing Ithaca High School on PTA Council. She is a current member of the Equity and Inclusion Leadership Council and volunteers as a family advocate at school meetings through the Village. Thank you, Karen. Karen is the Operations Effectiveness Manager at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County. And prior to this, she was the 2nd Executive Director here at the Village. So Karen, I'm turning the evening over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Meryl. And thank you to our 4 candidates who are running and our 3 of which are our incumbents. And thank you because this is a volunteer role, which it requires definitely commitment on your part. Thank you for being willing to do that and for those that are continuing in that. So we're going to start this evening with introductions. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for any of our questions, for all of our questions, at which time, as Meryl has stated earlier, you'll see the timer on the screen. So I'm going to start the introductions, starting with first name alpha order, and we'll start with Ann to introduce yourself to our audience.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Ann Reichland. And I have been on the board now for 2 terms and am running for re-election. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a visual artist. Some of my work is as big as houses. In fact, one is on an old house foundation. Some fill room and some could fit in your pocket. I have taught sculpture and drawing at a college level for about 11 years, but also currently teach freelance basis to the younger kids. My particular group that I like to teach is pre-K and kindergarten. I'm a parent of 2 ICSD alums who went all the way through the system, through our district. So the other thing is, one of the reasons I'm running is I'm passionate about education. My kids had a good education here, and for me, being on the board is a way to give back to the community. One of the things that I've learned so much about serving on the board is how the school district is kind of an intersection of all the things that we deal with in our society come to bear within our school districts. And we have an opportunity within the school board and within the district to really work and develop ways to kind of solve some of these really difficult problems. I embrace the mission of the district to dismantle the racism within it. And I feel that that is something, my own journey of learning has been something I've learned a tremendous amount serving with my colleagues on the board, serving with the leadership in the district, with the school and members of the community. One of the things that I believe that I can bring to the board is I bring both my passion, but also my way of thinking outside the box as a visual artist, and of analytical thinking and thinking through problems and being a good listener. So that would be my hope, to continue to bring that if I am reelected to the board. So thank you.
Thank you. And now Kelly, an introduction and also why you're running for school board member.
Hi, thanks for having me tonight. So I am an Ithaca College graduate. I have been in Ithaca since 1998. I am married to an Ithaca educator, and my son is a middle school special ed student in the district. I own my own building business. I do a lot of remodels and a lot of deck building, a lot of big creative projects. So one of the things that I bring to my business and to the board is that I'm a very transparent person. You get what you see. There's nothing about me. I'm very open, very honest, and across my life, including my building, obviously, I bring a lot of creativity, and I think that when it comes to the board and to our students, that you have to be a creative person. As Anne said, you need to think outside the box. You need to get a little creative with things that we're trying to adjust and new things that we want to bring into the district. And we have to do that with our students, our teachers, and our community all included and in mind. I'm very excited to join the board. I can't wait to get into the school buildings and learn more about the process of the Board of Education and what actually I will be allowed to do and how I can participate to make our district better.
Thank you, Kelly. Moira.
Hi, thanks to all who organized this forum and are participating. I've been part of the Ithaca community since 1978, though some of the time I wasn't actually living in Ithaca. I taught high school English for 35 years, 25 of them at Ithaca High School. My one daughter was born and raised here and attended Beverly J. Martin, Lehman Alternative Community School, and Ithaca High School. And she, after teaching in New York City for 5 years, returned here 10 years ago and has been teaching English at LACS and is now raising her son here. My sister and one of my brothers have raised their families here, and my nieces have gone to Ithaca schools. And both my sister and my sister-in-law retired as teachers from ICSD. So I have deep roots in this district. I'm now running for my third 3-year term. I first ran after having been retired for a year from 35 years of teaching. I had time and a lot of interest in education and in the ICSD in particular. At the time, there were 4 open seats, and I wasn't even sure if there would be enough people willing to step forward for those 4 seats. During my first term, I was somewhat surprised at how sharp the learning curve was, despite my long experience. And in addition, and then after 3 years, I felt I was really hitting my stride as a board member and with all that I'd learned. And in addition, I really found serving on the board to be a growth experience. It was, in fact, more engaging than I had expected it to be. After a second term, I feel the same way. The past year has been particularly time consuming and stressful, but I feel a real commitment to using my knowledge and experience and the collaborative relationships that I have developed to continue to help the district tackle the challenges that are and will continue to be enormous.
Thank you. And Nicole, your opening statement as to why you're running.
Hi, Karen. Thank you, everyone, who invited me here and put this all together. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Lefebvre. I have been a resident of the Ithaca community for 18 years. I graduated from Ithaca College. I currently have 3 children that are enrolled in our school district. I am in my second term. I'm seeking a third term because of my commitment to public education, because of my love for my children and their friends, and because of my commitment to our community. When I think about my own personal life experience of growing up in New York City and coming from 2 parents who didn't graduate from high school, I know how much of a difference it has made in my life to be able to graduate from high school as well as college. And thinking about intergenerational poverty and the fact that education opens up many doors and the access. So in terms of what I hope to continue to bring to the Board of Education is a lived experience, connecting and communicating with folks about what the issues are, what their needs are. Also, I'm a public servant. I've served on many boards, and I believe the rent that we pay on this earth is giving back, is connecting with others, and it is loving and caring for our neighbors. So I'm here today because of my love and commitment to this community, because my kids are here, which means I'm here. And I want to be able to use my time in the best way to have the biggest impact that is possible, and that is reaching across the table and talking to others that I might not be in communication with because our community is racially and socioeconomically segregated. So I think being on the board has provided me the opportunity to work with Anne, to work with Moira and other board members who have diverse and very different perspectives, political beliefs, but our intentions and our goals are still the same. So I hope to continue to be able to do that.
Thank you, Nicole. Now we're going to get into the questions to each candidate, and I'm going to start with Kelly. And just a reminder to our attendees that some of you may have joined late. If you want to make sure that you don't see the timer and the questions on the screen, go into view options and click on your Zoom ratio and get move it down to 50% so that you'll be able to see the faces of our candidates and see fully as to what's happening. So our first question for Kelly, and all of the candidates will be asked this question, is what does equity mean to you? What have you done or will you do to ensure equity in the Ithaca City School District? And we do have a question on the screen. Kelly?
Yeah, so equity to me, I think that there's been a great focus in our district on the racial equity. And to me, it's all encompassing. It's racial, it's sexual identity, it is socioeconomic. And I think we're doing a great job at bringing in the anti-racist ideals and putting programs into place, but I don't think that we are focusing as much in the other areas, specifically socioeconomic. And I think that is where our district actually is lacking right now. We need to spend more time in our lower economic schools in the districts such as Enfield, that I know they've been in the papers, and a lot of community members have been speaking recently about that. They don't see us, they're not heard, they have no way to get to us. And that's kind of disheartening because they're a huge part of our district and everybody should be heard. We should know what's going on there. I think we need to have a greater presence there. And as a board member, one of the biggest things that I look forward to is being a liaison to the schools, because I want to be in those buildings, hearing from the people with their feet on the ground. You know, the teachers telling us what they're seeing from their students that are in poverty, or maybe are having even some mental health issues at this point, and how we can support them as well. Because I think it's all encompassing. In order to be equitable, we have to be equitable across the line, whether it's race, sexual identity, your socioeconomic status. And I think that is one of the biggest things that's at the top of my list as a board member, is making sure we're reaching every member of our district.
Thank you, Kelly. And Moira, for you to answer the same question.
Sure. So I think I first want to say what equity is not. Equity doesn't mean that everybody gets the same. It means that everybody gets what they need. So, you know, what has happened for me over the last 6 years is I've learned a lot from my colleagues and on the board, and from the people who work in the district that I've worked closely with, about, you know, the way in which systemic inequalities and marginalization are deeply rooted in institutions like the Ithaca City School District, and including the Ithaca City School District. And what, you know, we have seen is that we have been able to predict who will succeed and who will fail based on factors like race, socioeconomic status, gender identity, and other aspects of identity. So what equity requires is dismantling these practices that have negatively impacted diverse students and have created barriers to their success. We need to be, for all children, cultivating the unique and individual gifts and talents that they all have. What I've been doing on the board, particularly, I would say, in my participation in both in committee work, particularly policy committee, curriculum, and human resources.
Thank you, Moira. Nicole?
So for me, equity, very similar to Moira, means making sure that every student has the support that they need to be successful. It's the district looking at all of our systems and structures and making sure that they are ensuring that every child has equal access and an equal chance at success. And that's looking at our services and making sure that they're quality services, regardless of what your child's ability is. That they're still getting what they need, and that our teachers and support staff have what they need in order to give our students what they need. I think it's also the district looking at the barriers and the challenges for our students, as well as our families, to understand what prohibits some of our students from engaging in sports, in music, in the arts, in extracurricular activities. I think it's really important for us also to understand that this is very systemic. It's not Ithaca based. It is a bigger issue. So I think we have to be committed not only to addressing the issues, but also looking out of the box to create alternative and also radical solutions to those issues. In my time in the board, I've definitely been committed to equity, whether that's being at BJM in a forum coming home about instruments and parents and families having to pay additional money for a stand or for an instrument, and calling Dr. Brown or Daphne Shalulu to talk about these forums and making sure that all of our students have equal access to any instrument that they want to play, regardless of their socioeconomic class. This last spring when we shut down and thinking about meals and making sure all of our families were getting the meals that they needed. I was having conversations with our board and executive team about the locations and making sure that those locations were accessible, thinking about families and parents who would have to drive to these locations, and knowing that some of our families are hourly employees, so they can't just clock out, and that we should think about what our abilities were to be able to deliver meals to those who could not. So those are some things that I have done and have brought to the team regarding equity.
Thank you. And Anne, what does equity mean to you, and what have you done or will you do to ensure equity in ICSD?
Well, equity to me is having all children, no matter their background, race, class, economic abilities, have the opportunity to fulfill their potentials and to grow and to feel supported in being in the school district. One of the things that I've learned from my experience on the board is just what a complex question it is, and how the systems within the school district that I, as a parent, had kind of taken for granted, how many of these systems kind of reinforce these problems year after year after year. So one of the things that I've really appreciated is the way to which the district and the board has really begun to examine that through policies, through the code of conduct, and even in areas such as facilities, where you think about how, say, a restroom, whether or not it is a gender neutral restroom, like things that come down to every single decision. So one of the things that I have brought to the board is, I would say, a continual kind of open mind to continually to listen, but also to participate in the code of conduct addendum, which was kind of looking at some of the school policies that maybe inadvertently kind of reinforce these problems, being on the safety team, which also there are a lot of issues embedded there, and just becoming more aware of that. One of the other areas would be working with early childhood, which is an area that I've been the liaison for that, and making sure that there's opportunities for families and how we can make that system work better. For me, that's a way to build equity from the very beginning for where people enter our school district. So those would be some of the main ways that I've been working within the district and would continue to do so if I were to be reelected.
Thank you, Anne. Moira, we're going to start with you for question number 2. Many people have been talking about not returning to the old normal, in quotes. What is a lesson you've learned from the time of the pandemic that suggests a new way of going forward in ICSD?
Well, I think there are so many things that have been brought to light during the pandemic about how the old normal was failing, was not working for all kids. Everything from technological aspects and access, rather. Some people have it and some people don't. And that, before we were so heavily relied on technology, there still was, a real disparity, I think, for what some children were able to accomplish because of who had technology and who didn't. And so I think that's been brought to light, that we need to think about that. I think that we have certainly had teachers doing a lot of collaborative work because in some ways they had to, because everybody was totally new to this virtual learning and teaching. And it forced a lot of people to come together and seek solutions. And I think that, I've always been a valued collaboration tremendously, but I think that it's really, really clear that we need to really build in the time, the opportunity, the support for our teachers and staff to collaborate and to do professional development. So those are just a couple of things. I think there are a lot of things.
Thank you. Nicole?
Karen, before you put the timer on, can I just ask a question? In terms of old normal, would you be able to just, I'm not sure if this is your question or not, but you can just clarify what's meant by that, if we're talking about teachers and staff in terms of the way in which they work. Are we talking about inequities? I'm just trying to understand, because I guess I'll answer the question. I'll answer the question.
But I'll clarify if anyone wants to know. Everyone in the midst of this pandemic, people are always stating that, oh, can we return to life as it was before? And so that's the old normal. Are we going back, or do we have to forge ahead and consider something totally different and a different way of doing things and our outlook and so forth? And you just have to answer it in any area if you want to answer it in with teachers or whatever.
Okay. So I guess when I read this question and I say that I personally, and I think some, if not all of my board members would say that the old normal was not working for all students. The pandemic has obviously highlighted inequities that existed prior. And if you are a person of color, if you are LGBTQ, or if you're anyone who is not considered the norm, that part of the dominant group, your blinders were taken off and you just saw something for the first time. So I guess moving forward, I'm hoping that we're going to move past glorifying the problem and actually think about solutions and dismantling systems that have historically not worked for students. So I'm thinking about grading, not returning to old form of grading in terms of measuring a student's capacity by a digital number versus the effort and the potential that they have. I hope that we do not, I'm hoping that we are in a place of empathy and compassion and love, and we're understanding that our students are going to be showing up to us in the fall with a host of emotions, needing to learn how to re-socialize as well as adults. I know that personally, re-socializing with folks has been hard for me in terms of consent to hugging, the in and out. So as I think about the normal, I'm thinking about students and what we're hoping to provide for students, and that we're moving towards equity. We have a better understanding of equity. In this past year, we have gotten to a place where we have seen that everything is broken and the privileged have been doing well. And because everything has been broken, those who have been accustomed to privilege have spent a lot of time this past year talking about inequities because it's the first time they've seen. So I'm hoping we come into this new school year thinking about ways in which not to continue to perpetuate the same outcomes, especially as we look at our equity report card from this past year.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Anne?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. I think this year has just, not only has it highlighted a lot of things that were already there and just became more obvious, but it's just as a profound disruption. And I believe that out of that profound disruption, I would like to see people use some of the innovations, take advantage of some of the innovations that grew out of that. Try to find something beneficial of having gone through something where you know, the experience for teachers and for children and for families has just been really tough. So some of the things that I've seen from the board level and just seeing at the school level that I've been very excited by, where it be the outdoor gear project, where they really took advantage of outdoor learning opportunities. So I would like to see more that developed more going forward. Some of the ways that there were some strange silver linings, say with the remote learning, that the teachers found new ways to communicate with families. So that's something I think one could build upon going towards the future. I think their hybrid learning in the high school was hugely problematic. That said, I see potential in the asynchronous day. Like, could there be an asynchronous day within the school day itself, and on school grounds, not at home, but on the school grounds, that would somehow give more flexibility within the schedule so that people could have perhaps more tailored learning, more time to talk to teachers, time to catch up with homework or whatever that might be. So I feel that we need to harness the opportunities and also the insights that we gained from this year, and to really work with students and with the community for some of the emotional issues that have been so demanding going forward when they return to school.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And Kelly.
I actually could not agree with Nicole more. And I think that it did kind of rip the blinders off of people when this pandemic hit, as to problems that were already existing in the school district. And a lot of them do seem to focus around equity. So one of the things that from a parent standpoint that I think was done well was the collaboration between the teachers and including their students in that collaboration. My son was constantly asked if things were working for him, how, you know, from simple things like how his internet was going, his connections, because at the beginning it was a nightmare. And I mean, we were dropping internet connections every other second, and he was like, I can't get on my class. And, you know, and we all had a huge learning curve. You know, the kids were used to being on their computer, but not necessarily on things like Google Meet or Google Classroom all day long and interacting with other people. They're usually just kind of looking at their screen, and they're in their own little world. So I think, you know, going forward, I think the biggest thing is going to be collaboration. I think we need collaboration from the teachers, and to make sure that we know what worked, what didn't, because we do need a new plan in place if something like this were to happen again. Now we know it's possible that it could, and input from the staff, input from the administrators, and input from the students, because ultimately, you know, the students are the ones that it's affecting as far as their grades and their education. And if something really wasn't working for them, it'd be interesting to hear that so that we can, you know, move forward in a better manner the next time.
Thank you, Kelly. So we're going on to question 3, and we'll start with Nicole. And the question will be up shortly. Is there any metric on the equity report card on which you believe the district needs to put more focus? If so, why?
So yes. I think when we're focusing on this word equity and we're looking across socioeconomic class, free and reduced lunch, and we're looking at race, there's obviously a disparity when we're looking at graduation rates, when we're looking at reading and math, in terms of students that are at level and those who are not. So I personally feel very committed to our reading levels. Whether you're going to go off to be a PhD student or you're going to go into the trades or be an entrepreneur, being able to read is incredibly important. So that is something that I think that the district needs to put more focus on, because if our students are leaving elementary school and they're not reading on level, middle school and high school is going to be a nightmare, because they're going to continue to struggle. And if they're not getting what they need, and if they're not able to keep up with their other students, then I think sometimes the behavior and the call out for help manifest in different ways, and you get lost and you just continue to just try to survive. And I think that we can prevent that. We can prevent our students from disengaging, from not loving school by catching that early, by really investing in reading within the district, by putting resources into professional development and making sure that our reading teachers and our general education teachers and special education teachers have what they need to be able to send kids off to middle school feeling like they are ready and that the teachers are ready to receive them. So I think it's the teachers being able to receive them while also making sure that we're preparing our kids for success.
Thank you, Nicole. Anne?
Yeah, I think one of the things about this equity report card, this year's equity report card, is that it had to ask by necessity such different questions because of the pandemic. So it is kind of interesting to kind of compare it to other years. I know the question, one of the questions that came up a couple days ago was, is there one aspect of the equity report card that I look at more than others? And I really do think it's a combination. It's how they relate to each other. It's not maybe one more than another. But what I would like to say is, I feel it's like, what do we do with the equity report card? It's one thing to have the information, which is interesting, but it's another thing with how you use that information, the kind of questions that you grow out of that equity report card, the whys of it, and then how we apply that to the practices within the school district. One of the questions that I think I wish was on this equity report card that isn't is actually attendance. Like I feel like one of the things I don't know is whether any issues of people actually attending school as often. What was that like and how did that cut across various groups? Did some people have trouble accessing education more than others? One of the things that I really appreciated in this year's equity report card was there was a broadband access issue. And I think that's something that I would like to utilize more as a question, just because I feel like that's something we can advocate for. And I've been advocating as part of legislative advocacy and working with the New York State School Boards Association. That's something they care a lot about. And that's something that received a lot of attention as a result of so much remote learning. So I feel that I'd like to see that continue and more attention brought to how that impacts students' ability to participate, get their homework done, apply for college, and how lack of good internet or lack of good equipment is disservicing some kids more than others. And I think that's something we can do something about.
Okay, thank you. And Kelly, this third question is for you now. Is there any metric on the equity report card on which you believe the district needs to put more focus? If so, why?
Yeah, I can be honest on this one. I think the current sitting board members are going to have a little more input because it's just something I'm not completely up to date with, although I do know what it is and I have looked at the numbers. I think, as I was scrolling through it, I would like to see more focus on the attendance and the suspension numbers. I'd like to know why those numbers are as high as they are. And to me, that would mean there's something going on. Whether it's, again, we're going into the equity issue, but is it the lower economic classes? Is it the minorities? Is it people that cannot get access to things that the rest of the district can get access to? And that would tell me that we need to reach out more to them. If we have several students missing school or getting suspended, maybe we need to reach out with a little more of a lighter heart as opposed to a heavy hand. Maybe lessening suspension so that it's not a punishment, but reaching out and saying, hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Is there anything that we could offer? Maybe bring in a social worker, because it is disproportionate. And I think that if we focus on that and we focus more on getting them in the schools as opposed to suspending them to get them out of the schools because they're, causing a problem, maybe we'll even see in those classes that the graduation rates are going to start to rise as well, because currently they are not.
Thank you. And Moira.
So one of the things that I really have liked and learned from is in the way that the board and the administration has approached the information that we get from the equity report card is to look at it with an eye towards questioning, what does this information, these particular data points, what does it seem to be telling us? And then moving from those questions to seek answers that would then lead to applying solutions, practices, and seeking to change data points that we don't like. And I really, like the way it enables us to look at the data from so many different angles, to look at what different groups of students are experiencing and doing in their educational life. So like Nicole, I think that certainly reading and graduation rates and the disparities we see among different groups or between different groups in those areas is really important to raise the questions of why is this happening with this particular group of students. One data point that we do pay attention to, and I think is really important, is participation in co-curricular activities. And also, again, the report card being able to look at things like, so here's a particular group, what's their participation in co-curricular, and then compare it to other data points like graduation rate, like reading levels. Co-curricular activities, we know we have the information that says that it increases achievement, it creates a culture, and it gives students an opportunity to show their strengths and to be engaged in the community.
Thank you. And just a note for all of our attendees watching this webinar, if you'd like to take time later to go on the district website to just look over the equity report card. The Village at Ithaca is an organization, a community organization that was instrumental in connecting other community members with the school district to get an equity report card in place. And I think we were on our 11th equity report card. And as of this March 2021, there's an equity progress report. So you could see and review all of the metrics that some of our candidates mentioned. Now we're going into a phase of asking questions that were submitted by the community. We reached out to community members and just sent an email blast to people and asked if you'd like to ask the candidates, since we don't have an in-person forum this year, if you'd like to ask questions. So there are a few questions that were submitted by community members in advance that we're going to ask at this time. And we'll start with Anne for question number 4. During most school board meetings, there is a pattern of participation where an issue is discussed and board members share responses. The pattern often sees the white female members and Pat Moira speaking first. Have any of you looked at the patterns of participation and or considered the ways that you are stepping up or stepping back to make room for other members to participate?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question. And I have to say, I think the board meetings this year have been quite different online than in person. And one of the curious things about the online meetings, when they're on Zoom, it is a little harder to read, the whole kind of etiquette of Zoom, of when you jump in and when you don't jump in. And that is something that's quite different than in person, where you can't really see somebody's face in quite the same way. And I do think about the pattern of participation, but sometimes sometimes I haven't thought of it in quite that way. I think that's a really interesting question. I think sometimes it really depends how some, like for me, I'd say how do I feel about silence? Like, one of those people, I might be one of those people that, like, if somebody says, well, does anybody have any questions? And I get uncomfortable with silence. So I want to fill the space. So it's maybe not intentional. Sometimes I do that, or it really depends on the topic. And I don't think that I'm always weighing in on a topic, but I accept that as it's somebody's observation. I didn't see it. And I thank you. So, and definitely worth consideration. I'd be interested to hear whether it would be something to talk about with other board members to know whether or not, how they feel about that. So thanks.
Well, I was going in order before, but I'm not sure if I continue in order. I'm just actually reading this question. So I'll just go to you at this point, Moira.
Okay, well, this is really food for thought. And I do think about patterns of participation, but like Anne, I don't think I've ever thought of it exactly in this way. One thing I do know is that that the board officers, for instance, and I think as a matter of, I guess, protocol, they tend to hold back and let other board members speak first. And like Anne said, for me, it's almost difficult to remember what it was like before we were doing this on Zoom. And just the past month, we've been doing it hybrid, where some of us, including Pat and Anne and myself, have been in person. And we have actually sort of ignored some of our board members who are virtual, because we don't really see them and the screen is off to the side. I think this is a great topic for the board to discuss among ourselves. I think that when we have to talk about it with others, I'd also like to spend some time just thinking about, what is it that prompts me to speak up or hold back, and to analyze that more. I should say, I just got a message that my internet is unstable. Can you still hear me?
It's back. It's back. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for this question. I got this observation.
Yeah.
It's
So,
great.
Nicole, I don't know. Would you like to chime in?
I will say that I think this is definitely a conversation that should happen with the board. I'm also going to answer the question honestly. I have noticed the pattern, and because I know all of the board members, I know their personalities. So I will say, Anne, love you as a colleague, conflict aversive. So I know that she will be the first person to speak because she's comfortable with the silence, and she's going to thank people for what they've said, but may not respond, especially if it's about race or conflict, because that is not her that's not her comfort level. Moira wants to acknowledge what people have said. She wants people to know that she's heard what has been said and is going to sit on it and digest it. Pat is Pat. They're different personalities on the board. They're definitely racial tensions at times that we have not dealt with. And I think it's very hard for us as a board to tell our teachers and staff to do work that we haven't necessarily done as a board. Also, we have been living in a pandemic, so it's been very hard for us as a board to make time for board development, because we've been trying to keep the lights on and to keep children in schools. Me personally, I usually take a while to say something because I I answer from my gut, I answer honestly, and sometimes I need not be reactionary, especially because some of the issues that come up at board meetings, it's not just board business, it is my life, especially if we're talking about race and class. It is my identity, it is my kids' identity. So sometimes I have to check myself and also acknowledge that everyone is in a different place within their journey. And because it's a meeting, things can be taken out of context. And sometimes you need to follow up with folks that say things to have that one-on-one conversation versus being seen as defensive because the space isn't built to have those dialogues, especially if we're talking about identity. So yes, I think the white women on the board speak first and they take up space. And the board members of color usually this past year have just been trying to de-escalate situations because that has kind of been part of my job. I don't want to speak for anyone else.
Okay.
And I
All
felt
right.
like that's been part of my job.
Thank you. And Kelly, you haven't participated, but if you'd like to have an opportunity to say, maybe you've observed or watched.
Yeah, I've been at several board meetings. And to be honest, I have noticed, but I also think, and it's great to hear Nicole's comments as to the personalities, because as someone looking to be on the board, it's good to know, you know, kind of what you're stepping into and what you're seeing from the inside. Because I know there are several different personalities, and there's going to be disagreements. And I think I agree with you that sometimes those disagreements need to take place off screen and not in the public eye before you come back with a response. I do think that this year has made it difficult at the board meetings, just giving several of the issues that have been going around and the amount of intensity coming from the community. And just from my perspective, it's interesting because what I viewed at the board meetings, and I guess there's different sections of the board meetings, right? There's ones where the community sees, and there's ones where you're behind the scenes and we don't see your interactions with each other. Because from a community standpoint, coming from the outside in, I found it odd that it was always the white men that were speaking first. And I know our president needs to in certain instances, but it seems like 90% of the time it was being monopolized by the white men on the board. And I do feel like voices were getting stuffed down because of it. And voices weren't being heard and opinions weren't being heard. And I do feel like there were several instances where I felt like even just all the women across the board were kind of being silenced, as the public felt they were too. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. So as mentioned, that these are questions directly from community members, and I'd like to encourage our community members. We do have on the school district website a Let's Talk portal that you could always ask questions, and as well as if you want to ask questions of board members, the board members ICSD emails are also on the school district website, so that things like this you may ask them at that time too. So we will go on to question number 5, and I will start with Kelly. LACS is part of Ithaca City School District, yet students must apply. New Roots Charter School is independent of ICSD and welcomes students from Tompkins County and neighboring counties. There continues to be a demand for this alternative school. Given there is another alternative middle school, were you in favor of ICSD spending money against adding middle school grades to New Roots, and why? For the new candidate, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, I'm going to be honest. I have very little knowledge of the question here, as far as adding middle school grades, money against adding middle school grades to the New Roots. I know what they both are. My son is actually in LACS. So I'm very familiar with LACS. I'm very familiar with why students want to go there, why there's such a draw. And I know as a parent why I wanted him to go there. So I think I'm going to focus kind of more on the fact that there's a demand for the alternative school. I don't know why ICSD would not want to add middle school grades to New Roots, honestly. We have had this discussion, actually it was in the forum last night, as to more and more students wanting to join LACS and they can't because we don't have enough space, we don't have enough teachers. And my response would be the same as it was last night. Split the middle schools and make them more LACS-like. Do something so that these students that cannot really thrive in our current middle schools for various reasons can have the same opportunities that the kids that are going to LACS are getting. It's such a different experience than walking into, DeWitt Middle School that I honestly don't know why we wouldn't want all of our middle schools to be like LACS. It's just amazing. The kids have more freedom to be themselves, to be open and honest human beings, to thrive on their own basis, and they have such a great support system. So I would say I think ICSD is self-defeating themselves if they don't put money into that area.
Thank you. Moira?
Well, I'll focus on how we dealt with New Roots desiring to add a middle school. So there has been in the community and among the board concern about the fact that New Roots, which was chartered as a high school program, and under the charter school program in New York State, there were certain benchmarks that they had to reach in terms of attendance and student achievement. And year after year, they were failing to meet those benchmarks. That concerned us because we have Ithaca School District students, our responsibility, our students going there, and there were questions about whether their needs were being served at that school. And so when New Roots was proposing a middle school, the shortcomings of the high school program were a concern. And then we discovered by accident that that New Roots had in effect instituted a program that involved middle school age children, and yet that was not within their charter. And so we felt we had to act to make sure that New Roots was playing by the rules. And in terms of spending money to file a complaint, we have a lawyer, we have a law firm on retainer. And so there was no additional money going to filing a complaint that we thought was appropriate. And in fact, the finding on our complaint was that New Roots was in fact in violation of their charter when they instituted their LEAP program.
Okay, thank you. Nicole?
I was honestly pretty, I think I used the word indifferent towards the decision to spend money against New Roots to add middle school. As this part of the question states, there continues to be a demand for alternatives to school. And I remember having plenty of conversations with Anne a few years ago about wanting to have conversations with the principal, wanting to know what's working, what's not working there. I am personally committed to students finding success and finding an education that feels right for them, whether it's within ICSD or within New Roots, because kids need different things. So I was more wanting to know, I was leaning more towards New Roots is saving children that we are honestly failing at ICSD. So if New Roots is able to save kids, and it's not to the standard of what New York State is saying is the standard, I personally was committed to wanting to have more conversations to find out where's the middle ground. The law is the law, and obviously we had to move in that direction. But me personally, while we were having those conversations, I was more wanting to know what can we do to support New Roots so that their graduation rates can be at a place where they can support more of our kids who are saying ICSD is not where they want to be.
Thank you. Anne?
Yes, I support the fact that the district questioned the New Roots middle decision or desire to expand their charter to include middle school. The reason I support that is one of the things that when New Roots proposed it, there was a hearing as is required by state law. And it was during that hearing that the Ithaca City School District Board, who was at that hearing, learned for the very first time that they'd already started a middle school without telling anybody and without going through the regular process. It was learned that there were students that were part of this LEAP program, which although I think has some merit to what that LEAP program was trying to do, but it was outside of their charter. So my view is that the school needs to play by the roles and the structures that are there. And that given that already as a high school, there were issues with the number of students who are enrolled at New Roots. There's a chart, they have a chart, they'd already had a charter for, I'm not sure how many, but about 200 kids, which changed over time to 160 kids. But one of the reasons I think that there was a desire for that was to keep enough students going to New Roots. I think it should be understood that it's a financial issue for the district. Yes, I strongly think alternative ways of educating are really important, and LACS does a really good job with that. And there are lessons to be learned within our traditional middle schools. That said, every student that goes to New Roots, the district pays tuition for that student. And that's true for all the schools derived in any school district that sends their child to New Roots. So when there are children that are going to New Roots that are not part of their charter, then it becomes a fiscal issue that it becomes a responsibility for the school district, the host school district, which we are, to ask those questions. And it was actually decided in the favor of the Ithaca City School District.
Thank you. Now, our next question, question number 6, is specifically for Kelly as a new candidate. Have you regularly attended school board meetings during this year? And what have you learned about the challenges you will face as a new board member?
So I have attended several school board meetings this year. I can honestly say I've had to miss the past several because I have a job that starts at 4:30 in the afternoon and ends at 1 a.m. And that job I actually am doing away with if I am elected, because I want my focus to be on the Board of Ed. Being a builder, I make my own schedule during the day, so I'm gonna be doing away with the evening portion so that I can focus my efforts on answering emails and being at the board meetings and really giving it my 100% attention. What I have learned about the challenges is the biggest thing is that I'm learning there is a very, very steep learning curve, as we've heard from Moira and also other board members. But I am up for the challenge. I love challenges and I love this district. There have been a lot of issues in the district this year that I don't necessarily think were dealt with in the greatest of ways. I do think there was a lot of silencing of voices, both on the board and off the board. And I think we need a fresh view. You know, coming in it's kind of interesting. I feel kind of intimidated to an extent because all of these wonderful women have experience on the board, but at the same time, a new person coming in who has no preconceived ideas, who is not in the schools, is looking at it through a very different lens. I am looking at it through the lens of a parent and a community member and a taxpayer, and as a member of the LGBTQ community. And I think those are great assets that our current board does not possess.
Thank you. So we are going on to our last question, number 7, and we are going to start with Moira. And it's a long one. It's going to come up shortly. Research and best practice recommends that only 30% of the classroom population have IEPs, which are individualized educational plan, in a given classroom. However, we know that this ratio is exceeded in some ICSD classrooms and results in class disruption, disciplinary issues, and students falling behind in reading and math. What are your plans to ensure that the district stays within the best practices recommendations, and how can we ensure that the students, mostly Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, and special needs students, most affected by these ratio issues are helped so they can catch up and not fall behind?
I think my answer is going to be relatively short on this one. I think that the board needs to get information from our personnel, our administration, about exactly what is the data about, where are their classrooms and where these guidelines are being exceeded, and to get information about why this has been the case, and to charge our personnel and with our support to figure out how to adjust things so that we remain within these guidelines. And that the role of the board is to understand what's needed. And certainly this is something that's needed, and to ask our personnel to tell us how can we address this? What sort of resources do you need the board to approve in order to address these problems? So I think, this question has prompted me to put it on my agenda to say, we need to have a report from our personnel about exactly where we stand in relation to this problem, and to have some serious conversation about what are we going to do about it.
Thank you. Nicole?
So I think there's a I see it being as a multi-prong solution. So I think we need to dispel the notion that certain schools are where our children are going to most succeed when they have IEP. So a few of our schools have higher numbers. So that is one. So what are we doing for our schools that have higher numbers of students with IEPs? Not even classrooms, but buildings and schools. When we're looking at our open enroll numbers, certain families are going to certain schools because they've heard that certain schools are more welcoming to students who are needing more services. So I think all of our schools need to be prepared to receive any child regardless of what their need is. 2, I think that the board needs to do a better job of being in communication with our MEIs, which is a new structure that we put in place in the past couple of years, and getting an update from them, to getting the numbers and the data from the previous structure that we had, and if there are any changes that we've seen. I also think it's really important to talk about how many special education teachers we have in comparison to our general education teachers. What are the resources that they need? I also think that we have to really look at our inclusion plan and ask ourselves if it's working. And before asking ourselves if it's working, what does it look like when inclusion is working well? So yeah, I would start with looking at the numbers overall in the district, specifically within our elementary schools, of how many students we have with IEPs and what that density looks like in certain buildings, and looking at the tenure of our teachers and if we're being thoughtful about where we're placing students, and also more importantly, our evaluations, because sometimes the evaluations of our students take a lot longer. So our students who need one-to-ones and need specific services, our teachers aren't hearing about that until weeks in. So getting that staff into the classroom takes even longer. So I think being on top of our evaluations and having those folks in contact with our students to be able to give them the services that they need is really important.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. And you mentioned an acronym, which I'd like to clarify. That's MEIs, that's Master Educator for Inclusion?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, so Anne, if you could answer the question.
Well, thank you for the question. One of the things that I've learned being on the board for the past 6 years is that as a board member, we're looking at the district from somewhat of a bird's eye view a lot of the time. When I see that figure, I say I was not familiar with that particular thing. And so I guess for me as a board member, hearing that now, I would refer that question and make sure the question gets asked to the person in the at the district level that or our chief inclusion officer, who would no doubt be the one that would know most about that. So that is something to be raised to find out whether there are some issues surrounding that, whether we have enough staff, whether this was an issue as a result of the pandemic where people are more spread around, with the remote learning versus in-person learning. Is this something that happened in one classroom? As this happens a lot? So there are numerous questions, and it's a question worth asking. And as I say, I think I would bring that question to our inclusion, the person that kind of really addresses the issues of inclusion, to find out if this is a widespread problem, and if so, what resources are needed to help remedy it.
Thank you. And Kelly?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I read the question over and over, and part of it is, I'm reading this question and it looks to me like we're saying that children with IEPs are causing disruption in a classroom. I guess it depends on your interpretation of the question. And I strongly disagree with that. I don't think that the kids with IEPs are causing disruption. I think any child with or without an IEP can cause disruption and can cause other children to fall behind. After all, they're children. They're going to be disruptive. Are there children who may have services that are a little more disruptive? Yes. But I think it starts at the very top, which is that there's a breakdown in our RTI process, in that we don't have enough specialists or enough teachers, enough people implementing RTI. And I think that's where we lag behind in our special ed program. If there were more people that could do the RTI and say, this student needs, needs a reading teacher, I think part of the problem is that we don't have someone that can do the RTI, so they get sent for services, and instead of just having a reading teacher, they end up with an IEP. And really under their IEP, what they're getting is the reading services that they could get in general education. So I think, one, our numbers are skewed because I think we do have way more kids with IEPs than might necessarily need it. But I also think it works in the reverse too, because I think there are also kids who they're pushing RTI, and they're actually not getting the services by a specialist that they need. And it's a delicate balance. But these kids, all of the kids, whether they have an IEP or not, all need attention, and they need whether it's specialized or not, they are all going to be seeking attention in one way or another. And sometimes the kids without IEPs need more.
Thank you, Kelly. So we're now nearing the end of our time together, and we're going to hear from each of the candidates on a closing statement, and they will be given 2 minutes each, starting with Nicole.
I did not prepare a statement, but um, as a parent of 3 kids, my hope and dream is that my kids go to school and they interact with people that love them, that care for them, and that hold them, especially because I work 40 to 50 hours a week. So my expectation of being on the board is being able to provide a voice of the experiences that my kids are having, my parent experience, as someone who is an activist, someone who is a community organizer. I believe in meeting people where they are to an extent, and also being able to listen with empathy, which is something that I strive to practice. Being on the Board of Education has been both rewarding as well as exhausting. I am someone who's very much a systems thinker, so being on the board and being able to look at processes and structures and being able to recommend changes that will have a large impact on the organization is something that I do at my work, as well as something that I enjoy to do. Me being on the board, you're always going to get my full, authentic, raw self. I will look to my board members all the time to be more diplomatic than I, because they usually are. But I am compassionate, I am loving, I am committed. And I'm here. I'm going to be part of this Ithaca community. So whether I'm reelected or not, you will still see me at committee meetings. You will still see me advocating for children. So I am happy to have had the time to spend with all of you this evening. And my email is on the Board of Education district website. So if you have follow-up questions, or send me an email or call me, because I believe my number is on there as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Anne?
So I just thought I'd finish up a little bit by telling you some of the things that I would continue to want to work on should I be reelected. Since I've been on the board, I've been chair of the Legislative Advocacy Committee, and advocating for the needs of our district is something I both care passionately about and will continue to do. We've so far we successfully passed, working with our partners in Albany, the legislation that allowed the district to establish a health insurance reserve. And currently we're working on legislation that would make the life of our school health professionals easier by helping them keep better track of immunization data. And happy to say that it unanimously passed the state assembly this week, and passed overwhelmingly in the state Senate. So really excited about that. So legislative advocacy, advocating for resources for our district and for our students, for state and the state level and national level, that would be something I would like to continue with. I'm a huge advocate for the arts. As a visual artist, I really believe in the kind of creative thinking and imaginative thinking and thinking outside the box that arts can be, and that art is really as much about process as about product. And I want as many students to be able to have that kind of experience. So I would continue to advocate for that within the district. And finally, early childhood education is something I really care about, and have been working as part of an early childhood task force to better connect our community childcare providers with our school service pre-K program. How can we make that better? How can we make it better for families? How can we make it better for kids? How can we take advantage of some of the attention that's finally coming to early childhood, and really make a better system working in Ithaca? And then finally, I just want to one last thing. I feel like I could use this, my 2 terms on the board, to help navigate these really challenging times ahead, coming out of this pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you. And Kelly?
So I'm actually going to end by telling you a little bit more about myself, which is where I came from and why I speak so much to special ed, which I think has been made clear given my son, and also to the socioeconomic disparities in our community. I do not come from money at all. I was a child that, had to literally did not have electricity at times and had to walk out to a well with a bucket and lower it down and bring water into the house and pour it into an old metal milk can that stayed by our sink to do dishes. And I often laugh sometimes, and my son thinks it's funny, but it's also at the same time not. He'll be like, I'm starving. And I'm like, have you ever had a mayonnaise sandwich? And he was like, no. And I'm like, then you're not starving. Because until you've gone through that, you can't truly understand it. And I have gone through that. And I think that is the biggest thing. If I had to say what the biggest thing was that I bring to this board, is that I do have that background. I watched my mother and my father struggle my whole life. And it was a struggle for me first starting out and trying to get out of our small hometown. And I made it to Ithaca College against all odds, being the only one of 10 kids to graduate high school and the only one to hold 2 college degrees or any college degree at all. So I'm very proud of those facts. And I think that could be a symbol for our young students that are facing economic issues at this point, and even parents who are, because you can climb out. You can climb out of that depth of darkness that feels like nobody's there. And I think, given as board members, we work for the parents. Without the students, none of us have jobs. And I think our parents need to know that, and they need to know that we're on their side and that we want all of their children to succeed.
Thank you, Kelly. Moira?
Thanks. I think if it weren't for the pandemic, I may not be running for a 3rd term. And not because I'm totally spent, not at all, really, or that it hasn't continued to be a real growth experience and a rewarding experience. But, I get the idea that new perspectives and new vantage points and backgrounds could benefit the board. But I just feel that that it would be irresponsible of me not to want to continue the work, given the background that I have, having served for 6 years. Also, some of the other things that I've brought to the board is my historical memory, having been here for so long and been involved with the district for so long. I feel very connected to the district, not only because my daughter is a teacher there, but my grandson will be going to Ithaca City Schools very soon. So, it's hard for me to not be involved. And as Nicole said, even if I'm not reelected, I will continue to be involved. I also feel like I want to talk about some of the things that I have worked on the last 6 years that feel really important to me. So one is working on the policy committee under the leadership of Sean Eversley Bradwell, in which we are going through the entire policy handbook and looking with a lens of modifying, getting rid of, changing policies that are in longstanding ways oppressive. On the HR committee, we are working diligently and are so grateful to have Ladira Velasquez Sims working with us to change our hiring recruitment practices to better ensure that we have a shot at a diverse staff, which is important for all of our students. And then finally, I've been on the curriculum committee, and I bring my background in teaching and my deep interest and love of the issues connected with teaching and learning.
Thank you. So thank you to all of our candidates running and our 3 incumbents for the years of service that you have brought to the Board of Education and to this community. Thank you to those that have been watching us. and hearing more about the candidates. Thank you to the candidates, especially for being involved in so many forums this week as you are spending time connecting with the community. This year's election will be held next week, Tuesday, May 18th, from 12 to 9 p.m. You can vote at your designated polling places. The information is on the district website. If you haven't received one of the mailer packets as of yet, hopefully you have done so. This is for a budget vote and the school board election. And do remember, there are 3 open seats. We have 4 candidates, 3 open seats. So thank you all. Thank you for those that were able to watch this webinar, and have a good night.